Hey everyone! Welcome to Informatic. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. I parked my bike in front of the restaurant, wiping the perspiration from my upper lip. It was unseasonably warm this January, but sweating during a Florida winter was better than freezing in a northern one. I twisted my hair into a knot, my neck cooler once the long black swath was off it. With a final swipe at my forehead, I entered the restaurant, ignoring the tables in favor of the patrons seated at the bar. If Marty wasn't here, then I had to ride to his next favorite hangout, and it looked like it was going to rain. I threaded through the tables, making sure to keep my right hand affixed to my thigh so it wouldn't accidentally brush anyone. It was that, or wear the bulky electrical glove that inspired questions from nosy strangers. When I got to the bar, I smiled at the pierced, tattooed man who scooted enough to give me space at the countertop. "Seen Marty?" I asked him. Dean shook his head, rustling the chains that led from his nostrils to his ears. "Not yet, but I just got here." I started to walk away, but Dean tapped his beer with his fork, directing my attention back to him with the sound. "Want me to call the Tropicana and ask if Marty's there?" He had correctly guessed the next place I was headed to, but then again, Dean had known Marty longer than I had. "It's only a mile and I need to keep my legs in shape." "They look fine to me," Dean said huskily, his gaze lingering on the limbs in question before moving over the rest of my body. Yet, in a flash of weakness, I found myself looking at a couple who were seated at a nearby table. Their fingers were interlaced as they whispered to each other. That simple touch was something they hardly seemed aware of, but it caught my attention like a spotlight beamed onto it, turning that ache in my chest into something closer to a burn. The couple glanced at me, perhaps sensing my stare, but then their gaze quickly passed me by. Either they hadn't noticed the scar that ran from my temple to my right hand, or they didn't find it as interesting as the lizard-scale tattoos covering Dean's entire body, Raquel's beard, JD's 8-foot height, or Katie's 14-inch waist that looked even tinier compared to her ample hips and double D chest. It was still early too. Most of Showtown USA's regulars didn't get here until after 9. The couple continued to stare at the group by the bar without any attempt at subtlety, and the annoyance I felt over my friends being gawked at shook me from my brief melancholy. Some tourists came to Gibsonton to marvel at the carnival remains decorating many streets, or to see the occasional trained bear, elephant, or other exotic animal on someone's lawn, but most of them came to stare at the freaks. The locals were immune to it, or played up their peculiarities for tips, but I still couldn't shake my anger over the rudeness so often displayed. Different didn't equal subhuman, yet that's exactly how many of Gibsonton's residents were treated by passers-by. Still, it wasn't my place to lecture people on their lack of manners, not to mention Raquel wouldn't take kindly to me chastising her customers. With my lips compressed together, I headed to the door, startled when it flung open as I reached for it. I jumped back in time to avoid being plowed over by a man who strode through as though he owned the place, but I wasn't fast enough to prevent his hand from grazing my arm. "Ouch!" he snapped at the contact, giving me an accusing glance. What the hell? He didn't know it, but he was lucky. If I hadn't learned to harness some of the currents in me, or release the worst of them into lightning rods only an hour before, his experience would have been much worse. "Static electricity," I lied. "It's bad around this area." His expression said he didn't believe me, but I had nothing in my hands, and my outfit wouldn't conceal much either. After another glare, he turned his back on me. I went out the bar door, and a harried-looking blonde ran right into me. She let out a yelp that I mentally echoed out of sheer frustration. After months of a spotless record, now I'd zapped 2 people in less than 5 minutes. At least Rude Dude had taken some of the extra voltage out of me, so hers probably did feel like static electricity instead of mild electrocution. "I'm sorry," I said, backing away at once. "It's my fault." She laughed, patting me in an apologetic way. I wasn't looking. I didn't hear the rest of what she said. Images seared across my mind in varying shades of black, white, and gray. I was in bed with my lover, our heavy breathing the only sound in the room. Afterward, I whispered that I was going to tell my husband I was leaving him the following weekend. That wasn't what made me stiffen, however. It was the next images that filled my mind, in full color this time, only hazy, as though seen through a fog. I was in a thick, swampish area, staring in horror as my husband's hands clamped around my throat. Pain exploded in my neck, blurring his image as I futilely scratched and clawed at his gloved hands. He increased the pressure while telling me he'd found out about my affair and exactly how he'd dispose of my body. The pain intensified until it seared its way down my entire body. Then mercifully it stopped, and I felt like I was floating away. My murderer stayed where he was, his hands still clamped around my throat, unaware that I was now looking down at him from outside my body. Finally he let go. "Frankie!" I blinked, back in my own consciousness, the hazy images fading into the familiar crystal-clear surroundings of the bar. Dean stood between me and the woman who'd unwittingly triggered my abilities by touching my right hand. He didn't make that same mistake, but Dean was close enough that I had to look over his shoulder to see her. She clutched her hand as though it hurt, her brown eyes wide as she babbled something to the man I now knew was her husband. The same man who'd murder her tonight if I didn't stop him. "Stop them!" I gasped to Dean, still feeling the phantom effect of fingers on my throat. "He's going to kill her." If anyone in the bar had been minding their business before, that statement directed their attention to me better than a gunshot. Jackie gaped at me, but her husband's eyes narrowed. He began to push his way past the small crowd that gathered around us, dragging her along. Dean stood in their path, blocking the way to the exit. "You're not leaving yet," he said calmly. The husband paused, looking Dean up and down. If Dean's expression wasn't intimidating enough, the scaly green tattoos covering his skin rippled when he crossed his arms, showing bulky muscles. "Come on," the husband muttered. "I don't want trouble." "Look in his trunk," I interrupted, my voice stronger. "You'll find work gloves, duct tape and leaf and lawn bags." The surrounding patrons had begun to stare at the husband. He laughed uneasily. "I don't have to listen to this shit. Plus he has an axe, a shovel, flashlights, bleach, rope, pliers, and a book on forensics." I cut him off again. "You found out she was leaving you and you couldn't handle it. So you were going to strangle her, pull out all her teeth, and cut off the ends of her fingers so even if her body was found, no one would be able to identify her." And then he made a huge mistake and whirled around, grabbing my shoulders. Dean went to haul him back, but I was faster. The memory of experiencing everything he intended for Jackie made me merciless, and I laid my right hand on his arm, releasing the hold I had over those unwanted currents in me. Another series of images exploded in my mind, colorless from age, but that wasn't why I touched him. My vision dimmed as I felt the current surge from me into Phil in less than the time it took Dean to yank him away. Phil fell onto the floor, and after several blinks I saw with satisfaction that he was still convulsing. A few tourists screamed. Jackie sobbed. I felt bad about that, but a few tears now were a far better fate than what Phil had planned for her. "What happened?" one of the unfamiliar onlookers demanded. "He grabbed her, so she tasered him," Dean said gruffly. I didn't have a taser, but JD moved in front of me, blocking that from view with his huge 8-foot frame. Jackie recovered herself and with shaking hands pulled a set of car keys from Phil's pocket. He didn't seem to notice, being too busy twitching and pissing himself. No one stopped her as she went out to the parking lot, but Dean followed her after tossing me a grim look. Jackie's scream moments later made several people walk out, some throwing money on their tables, some not. Jackie must have seen that I was spot on about what was in the trunk. Raquel came up to me and wearily rubbed her beard. "You're in for it now, Frankie." I thought she meant I had to cover the lost revenue from the tourists who were beating a hasty retreat. It was my fault that they stiffed their tabs, so I couldn't blame Raquel, but covering those expenses was worth saving a woman's life. It was only later, after Jackie sobbingly explained to the police what happened, that I realized the full extent of what Raquel meant. By then, it was too late. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more great content. And make sure to follow us on our other social media platforms for the latest updates. Links are given below in the description. See you next time.